Hi, this is Mark. In this video, I was just going to talk about chaos and how our processing speed is going to likely increase in the future. Now, right here, I just have a complexity as a function of variables or the number of bits that we can compartmentalize per event frame. So if we ever watch a movie, it's typically in event frames per second or frames per second. It's kind of like how our mind works. And what I'm illustrating here is if these are event frames, what ends up happening, as I illustrated here with the arrows, as if we're doing it per second span right here, and there's of course number of bits per span. Um, Basically, as you increase the number of frames, you're condensing into a smaller space. If you consider this 1 second span a range, for instance, and it basically if you have 60 frames, there's 60 subsets or 60 sections, equal distance sections within the span. And if we consider that each frame has X number of bits of information that we can process, and that's usually how our mind works. So, we have our brain, horrible drawing. This is a brain. And funneled in, we have information that's getting funneled in. And there is basically once it's processed, there's a filtering. And then between this filtering process, then we have output, thoughts or whatever idea. So basically, this filtering process or this transmission process is extremely fast, but it's not instantaneous. It's something that it's something that occurs within a very short time, which is like an event frame. And within each frame, there's our processing speed depends on how many bits per frame. That's well. So basically, how we're going to relate this is if we think of complexity as a function of number of variables. Um, okay, so this is going to be likely, we can consider there is a limit. This limit is, let's think of, we're just going to consider psychosis. When the brain can no longer organize the chaos. When the brain, too many bits of information to handle. So essentially what ends up happening, it's kind of like, and then it really shoots up. There reaches a point when the adaptation process, like this is like the limit. Um, so, we can think of this as bits per frame. And this is on a relative scale, but generally what ends up happening is this limit can oscillate. So this direction is adaptation. And then the other direction is age. Usually like due to age, and the brain is not able to withstand due to the mental faculties declining. So knowing this, basically processing speed is going to likely increase because through time, the number of variables added to the equation increases. So like over time, how can we view this? So if we take like a time span, so this is like the beginning of time. So if we have like event frames, we transgressed over here, event frame, and then we go to future. So basically complexity is increasing. More people. So like you may have like a few bits, and then over here, we got to deal with more variables like at a job, and then it's really getting. So basically, what ends up happening is like if we take a function and we consider, um, number of variables. per frame. So basically, and of course, processing speed. It's essentially a direct function, or I mean, we're just gonna make it simplified, just do like this. So if there's like no variables per frame, of course, no processing. So like we have different brain waves. So there's like brain waves. I believe it's like delta, and then it goes to, I may have this wrong, gamma, and then I believe it's alpha, I believe beta, and I think it goes to, uh, delta, gamma. I know there's more than, I thought maybe gamma's after beta. Hold on a sec. Totally my memory is joggled. Delta, gamma, alpha, beta. I think the gamma may be the last one. But either way, I'm gonna skip gamma. So I think delta, I think is like somewhere like 1 to 4 hertz or something like that. Her frequency was, I believe it's in that units, and then alpha is like, I think there was something in between. I think alpha is like 8 to 15 or so. Beta is like 15 to 30, and so forth. But basically, this is stress increases in this direction. And basically delta, like these two right here, is sleep. So I think there's a limit right here. And, within this range, it's sleep, relaxation. So basically our brain waves slow down. So this is as they increase, we have to deal with more stress. And our time perception changes due to that. But this is related to number of variables per frame. Is basically our, so basically, if there's like, there's going to be a relationship mapping between, let's just say, brainwave states. This is like, delta, alpha, beta. And then, we talk about number bits per frame. So there's going to be a relationship. If we go to delta, it's just going to increase, so forth. So, this is where processing speed increases. There's a relation here. So, generally, we're going to adapt to this rate. And because that we're dealing with more variables, our processing speed has to increase to deal with that complexity, so forth. So this is the inevitable consequence of, just the progression. But we get acclimated to it. So essentially, it's initially chaotic or complex, but after the adaptation process, like we think of like complexity, like if we could quantify adaptation, in this direction, and we have complexity, it may reach the maximum point, but it's a negative exponential function. It gets depreciated, and it approaches this limit. And this limit depends on our genetics and so forth, many different variables. But because of that, processing speed should be an oscillative function. So let's say processing speed, or not, more cyclic as the adaptation process occurs. So we have like initially stress, like you go into fight or flight mode. Fight or flight mode increases the, you start going into the beta and I think the gamma, where it gets very, very quick. This is like near-death experience. So before the adaptation process starts, and you start, let's just say you transverse. Let's just say there's like let's just say 10 bits per frame. and we're going to instantaneous. Therefore, the adaptation hasn't taken hold. And we're just going to do kind of like chaos. Let's just do 60 bits per frame. So processing speed, I think, this is going to be stress inducing, depending on the adaptation, of course. But when it hasn't occurred, and everything's like chaotic, this should reach like a, due to the brainwave activity increasing, it should reach a heightened state. And basically, let's just say this is the initial level. This is P naught. And then P naught jumps due to stress. So it jumps. So this is stress induced. And then it kind of starts going down. And then you approach a new limit, P prime, where P prime is greater than P naught. And therefore, this is kind of the regression. There's the process, and I think in life it's just a function. It's a function of the bits that we need to process in a given frame and the demands of the society that are increasing and the stress that's inevitably increasing, but we are adapting. So it's kind of going to level off, and it's depending on the rate of change of society and so forth. And it's dependent on how much stimuli we have and so forth. Internet, distractions, technological advance. You have cell phones, memes, social media, people. You have to go to meetings. We're bouncing off all over the place like billiards balls. But yeah, that's just my take on, this is part of like concept of chaos as well, and how you go into the disordered system, and then eventually gets dampened, and we're always going into this more chaotic system, and that allows us to propagate forward. But at the same time, we can't do so. We can't do it instantaneously, because we need to do it progressively. If you just shift to here, it's very tough to manage, and it induces more physiological strain, which actually I will talk about the ability to equalize something. So we always have a cyclic. That's the last thing I want to talk about. So with anything, heart rate, blood sugar, this could be anything. Just think of this as, we can just say blood sugar. Doesn't matter. I mean, it could be anything. So there's a neutral axis, and the body naturally tries to pull. Of course, there's insulin and whatnot. And there's called dampening agents. These are dampening agents. And basically you have to oscillate back. I mean, eventually the cycle repeats. You go high blood sugar, goes down, and it follows in between this generally in between a period based on the cortisol cycle. You have a cortisol cycle, so your blood sugar is kind of not going to be this erratic, but basically these forces or these dampening agents, or basically whatever's forcing it back towards the midpoint, is needed. Because like when you have diabetes, for instance, this is like this is blood sugar again. So I'm going to show like the progression usually is smooth. Usually have smooth. And then in prediabetes, what ends up happening is more like, not necessarily like this, but more chaotic. And then eventually you start going up. So this is like diabetes. You need insulin. This is like a pre-diabetes. This is normal, relatively normal. So therefore you don't have that force. So the force, it's like getting smaller and then it disappears. So it's getting like, smaller. This is a large. The vectors are getting smaller and smaller, over time. and it's creating a disequilibrium. So the same thing with physiological strain. Physiological strain creates a disequilibrium, and it causes our processing speed to kind of go off into towards the infinity, essentially. But not that's when it becomes chaos, complete divergence, psychosis, no control, so forth, and it really goes up much higher than is typical. So adaptation, the whole process, you need to equalize things, to the neutral axis or the equilibrium approaches a new limits. It's kind of always changing. So that's just my take. How I think processing speed should increase. The new equilibrium or new level is going to go in the upward direction, and therefore through generation it should move, depending on the demand of society, of course. But this is kind of analogous to why, like, if you had the generation gap, there's a generation gap. Grandfathers and so forth just note their processing speed. Or if you go to environments where it's very chill, the people over there who are spiritual, they talk at a much slower rate. They also smoke, marijuana. That could be an instance, but they're just chill, and their alpha waves are in, they're in the alpha wave zone, or they're in a meditative state, so it decreases. And of course, we're striving to do that because over time, brain waves are going to move towards alpha and get even more if we let it affect us. So therefore, by complicating life, it's going to happen, essentially. By living simple life, you tend to go in the other direction. Brainwaves approach delta, so forth. They go in that direction. Processing speed will slow down, but if you throw yourself in a very densely populated area, a lot of chaos, a lot of cars going everywhere, processing speed is going to have inevitably increase. So that's just, I'm going to stop right here. Hope you enjoyed. I'll see you next time.